All right, here's the thing. We have a special guest for you this morning, so we're going to do Sunday school a little different. We're going to do Sunday school a little different. We have a missionary that is home named Elizabeth Fox. Now, Elizabeth's brother and sister-in-law go to our church. They're the Foxes. They're awesome, and they contacted me really about a month ago and said, "Hey, she's going to be in town, Elizabeth. She's done missions. She's going to be in town. She would love to speak to your students about missions." And I'm thinking, okay, this is the year of warfare mindset. We're all about missions here at Evergreen, and literally we're about to go on a student mission. So I was like, Elizabeth, come on, let's do this thing. So she's going to come up here. She's going to share a few stories. She's going to talk about her ministry experience and how you can pray for her, and really how even you as a student could possibly get involved with missions. And we know that is something that is really important here at Evergreen. So I'm going to go ahead and give it up to her. Elizabeth, go on, come up here. Let's give her a round of applause.
Oh, okay. Sounds good. Sorry for bringing water up, but I have been speaking like all week and my voice is getting scratchy. I apologize. It's dry here. Like Texas, Oklahoma, I'm like, ugh, you guys don't have much moisture. I'm used to places like Thailand where you could probably swim just walking out the door. It's that humid always. So, yeah, my name is Liz, and I work for Global Encounters. It is a children's ministry mission organization. And you might be wondering, why kids? Okay, I've worked, I think, in every major religion group now around the world. And if you've been studying different religions, you know some are more open to the gospel than others. It's easier to share the gospel with certain groups and different cultures, more or less open to the gospel. But kids are open to the gospel all over the world. I have yet to find a group of kids anywhere in the world that isn't open to the gospel. And especially Global Encounters works with kids in really difficult places. We work with the minority groups. We work with kids from broken families. We work with refugees. Those kids are so excited to hear that there's a God who actually knows their name, knows them, loves them. They're like, what? There's a God like that? So I wanted to tell you a few stories of cool things that have happened on mission trips and hopefully inspire you to get on a plane and go somewhere on a mission trip yourself. So before I tell you those stories, though, let me back up just a little bit. How many of you have ever been on a ropes course? Okay, cool. You've done that where you're standing on the top of some telephone pole and they tell you to jump and you're like, how? The telephone pole's moving. All right, very first time I went to a ropes course. It was my brother Josh who invited me. He's like, do you want to come try out this ropes course? Super cool. I was like, yeah, that sounds fun. Never done anything like this. So I get there and I'm trying all the things, where you're like walking across some like log that's 30 feet up in the air and all those things. And finally get to the last one. And I climb 100 feet up this tree, and I'm standing on a platform at the top. It's about 5 feet by 8 feet, only 100 feet up in the air. Okay, it feels like you're standing on this thing that's about this big. And my brother is all the way down there at the bottom holding the rope, okay? So imagine, he looks like he's about this big, like way down there. And he says, okay, jump and try to get that trapeze out there. Okay, the trapeze looked like it was 20 feet out. I'm not the best at jumping, period, but let alone when it's like starting at 100 feet up in the tree. And I'm like looking down, and I'm like, there's no way. I am not going to reach that trapeze. Like, I am going to miss it. I am going to fall. And he's like, no, it's okay. If you miss the trapeze, I've still got you. Like, you're fine. I'm like, you're sure about this? Really? Okay. All right, how many of you, faced with that, you're standing at the edge of a 100-foot drop, and someone says, jump, you're fine, I've got you. How many of you would jump? All right, cool. Got some adventurous people, especially in the back row there. Well done. Okay, but let me give you a little bit more information. My brother, who's down there holding the rope and telling me to jump, is significantly bigger and stronger than me. Okay, he's taller than me. He has broad shoulders. He has lots of muscles. If he says he can hold me at the end of a 100-foot rope and I'm fine, he's strong enough to do that. Okay? Second, my brother didn't just invite me to go to this ropes course. He was the manager of the ropes course. He had helped build some of this ropes course. He had put on my harness for me. He had rigged up all the ropes we were using that day. If you decide to go hiking outside Colorado Springs, like Garden of the Gods area, and get yourself stuck on some cliff somewhere, chances are it will be my brother who comes and rescues you. Because he now works on the rescue team that goes and gets all of the stupid hikers out of the mountains. He knows high angle and he knows safety like nobody else. Okay, third, so second, he knows what he's doing. Third, he loves me. Okay, my brother Josh and I were just 2.5 years apart. We grew up fighting like cats and dogs. And if my family stories are to be believed, I think it was usually my fault. But somehow we survived and didn't kill each other, and we're actually good friends now. And there's no way that he would tell me to jump if he didn't know that I would be fine. Okay, so imagine you're standing at the edge of that drop off, and the person holding the rope, is strong, knows what he's doing, and loves you. How many of you will jump now? Okay, more hands. All right, I see some trust issues over here. Okay, so the other thing is, if you ever find yourself in that situation, don't think about it for too long, because otherwise you will freeze. You'll never get down. They'll have to come rescue you. Super embarrassing. Just back up and run, okay? And just run off and jump. And so I did. I backed up to the tree. I got my whole 8 feet of running, went off, jumped. Didn't even come close to that trapeze. Okay, I don't know how anybody gets there, but I didn't even touch it. And I immediately start screaming as I feel myself falling through the air. I'm like, ah! And then the rope catches me. Okay, I literally, only fell a couple feet. And I'm just swinging there, at the end of this rope, 100 feet up in the air. And my brother's like, see, you're safe. I'm going to let you down now, slowly. I screamed all the way down. Okay. It was all the way down. It makes you feel better. Finally, I get to the ground. My feet are on solid ground. I'm like, let's do that again. That was cool. Some people are like, no, I'm not doing that again. Hey, you don't know what you're missing till you try it out. I mean, so sometimes missions can feel a little bit like that you feel like God is asking you to do something impossible. And it looks scary, and you think, I don't think I can do this. And God says, it's okay, trust me. And maybe you're thinking about signing up for that mission trip or getting involved in some ministry, and you're like, I am quite sure I'm going to get myself into situations that I do not know what to do with. What if this goes south and this is bad and I'm in danger even? What am I going to do? Okay, so that has happened. My very first mission trip, if you guys want to go to the slides, there's one that's snow in Europe. You can go to that one. Okay, my very first mission trip, I was actually in charge of the mission team. And that's a long story. But I find myself in Europe, middle of the night, middle of a snowstorm, and all the keys to my hotel room are lost. All right, and in Romania, when it's 5 o'clock, the hotel staff goes home. And they don't come back until 8 or 9 o'clock the next morning. So if you're locked out, you're really locked out. It's not just go to the front desk and get another key. No, you're locked out. And so I'm out looking for these keys in a snowstorm, trudging along, trying to see, did they get dropped, on the way to the church, because we walked to the church. I searched the whole 4-story church building. It's now getting close to midnight. I'm walking back, still no keys. Just walking along, looking in the snow to see if maybe the keys are there. And I'm praying. And I'm like, God, I thought, you're supposed to be a heavenly father. Just saying, but dads don't let daughters sleep in the snow in Eastern Europe. Okay? That's just not okay. That's not, my dad wouldn't like this. And I was actually getting kind of mad. And I just very clearly heard God say, you need to trust me. And I'm like, yeah, I'll trust you when I have those keys in my hand. And he was like, yeah, that's not trust. You only trust me when you already know the answer. That's not trust. So I'm trudging along now. I'm grumbling at God in my mind, like looking for keys. And finally, I was like, okay, God, I don't know how the story's going to end. Pretty sure it includes me sleeping out here in the snow tonight. But I'll trust you. 5 minutes later, I had those keys in my hand. Now, I felt like that was really jumping in at the deep end of trusting God. That was only the beginning. So, South Africa. If you want to go to the next slide. I was working in the central part of South Africa. There's like all these little villages. We're running kids programs. It was going great. We get to this one village. And, okay, we have no problem holding kids' attention. I mean, our kids' programs are fun. We have all these different stations that the kids rotate through. There's games, there's crafts, there's stories. We have skits with like everybody acting in them. It's a blast. It was utter chaos that day. We could not get the kids to listen for anything. Okay, and this is not normally our problem. And I mean, it was so bad that it was like there was a wall between us and the kids. Like we just could not communicate with them. So we finished the day. I get in the van. We're driving back to where we're staying. And I looked at our host and I was like, hey, what is going on in this village? Like something is clearly different here than any of the other villages where we worked. He's like, oh, yeah, well, I mean, there's a whole coven of witches that's been praying against you since they heard you were coming. I was like, oh, that explains a lot. Did you think maybe you would tell me about that? Like, I feel like I should know about this. He's like, oh, yeah, there's also, like, there's a drug gang that basically runs the town. Like, it's a really strong drug gang. And it was like, oh, I feel like I should have known about this too. Like, these are significant. This sounds kind of dangerous, actually. So as a team, we're thinking about that night, like coming up with a plan. How are we going to deal with this? Because we're like, we can't do this utter chaos again. And the plan we came up with was to always have at least one person praying. And so as the kids would rotate around to their activities, we would always make sure that one person wasn't teaching and they were praying while everyone else was teaching. And we're like, I don't know, let's give it a try. Let's see if that helps. So I assigned the first person to pray, and I was like passing the torch to pray. I assigned the first person to be the most mature person on the team. The one that I was like, if anybody on this team knows how to pray, it's Rob. I'll have Rob start. And we start, Rob's praying. It's like a different crowd of kids. Like we could actually talk to them. They're listening. They're responding to the message. They're having fun. I'm like, this is great. Like, fantastic. And then I'm like looking down the row of like how I've got people lined up, to pass the prayer torch. And I'm like, oh, this is going to be interesting to see what happens. Because like that one just got saved a couple months ago. And that one, I don't know if she knows how to pray. Okay, we'll find out. I'm like, it's going to be interesting to see how this changes depending on who's praying. You know what? It didn't change. It did not change depending on who was praying. Because what matters is not the strength of the person praying. It's the strength of the God you're praying to. Remember how I said I could jump because my brother's strong? Like, I can trust him because he's strong enough to keep me safe. God is powerful enough to work in whatever crazy situation you find yourself in. Okay, so that took care of the witches that didn't like us. But then, like, everything's going great. I'm like, this is fantastic. I'm like walking around, just kind of, they were now doing a big skit. The whole team's teaching the skit, and I'm just walking around to make sure everything's okay. And all of a sudden, there's this disturbance going on with the older kids. And I'm like, I don't know what's going on. So I walk over. There's people there selling drugs to the kids right there in the kids program on the church grounds. And I was like, no, this cannot be happening. We do not do drugs at our kids program, drug-free program. And I'm like looking around, who can I send to deal with this? And there's nobody but me. Everybody's busy. And I'm like, okay, well, I guess I go deal with it. So I go marching up to the drug dealers and I'm like, hey, this is a Christian program. This is church grounds. We don't do drugs here. Like, you need to leave. And then I realized that there's two of them. And they're both bigger than me. And then I realized that right outside the gate, like right behind them, there's 10 more. And I'm like, it's me versus 12 guys. And I was all of a sudden like, oh, I might not have thought through this real well. Like, this just got dangerous. And the guys are just like looking at me like, why should we do what this girl says? And I'm like, I can think of 0 reasons, actually. And I started praying. I was just like, oh God, I think I just walked into a situation that I'm in way over my head. And remember that story of Elisha when he was surrounded by an enemy army and he prays and he asks God to open his servant's eyes because the servant is freaking out. And like God shows him there's a whole army of angels there. I was like, hey God, I'm the one who's freaking out now. And I think I could I just borrow like half a dozen of those angels? Only they need to be like really big. Like I want like 6 angels with 6 packs, like ripped, like standing there behind me. And I'm envisioning like 6 angels like standing there behind me like this, arms crossed like, yes, you have to do what this girl says. Take your drug gag and go. And I'm just like praying and having a stare down with the drug dealers at the same time. And they got the weirdest look on their face. And they took a step backwards. And I'm like, well, we're already in this, so might as well keep it up. So I took a step forward and I was like, that's great. That's 1 step in the right direction. Now keep going. There's the gate. Go. And they just keep looking at me. And they turn around, take their whole gang of guys, and left. And we never saw them again. And I'm just like, oh, I can't believe I'm still alive. And I turn around, and here, standing behind me, are 6 guys from my team, and they're all standing there like this. Okay. But just saying, they weren't anywhere close to the size of the angels that I've been praying for. Okay, I turned around, I'm like, wow, you're the 6 scrawniest angels I've ever seen. Pretty sure that is not what the drug dealers saw. I think they saw 6 of God's warriors standing there behind me like, yeah, you got to do what this girl says. Like, take your drug gang and go. Because, like I said, we didn't see them again the rest of the week. And it was a small town. Like, they avoided us. But then even better, that night, one of our translators came to us. And he was having a long conversation. He was really depressed. His dad had just died. He's talking with one of the guys on the team, got saved. He leaves, comes back the next morning. He's like, guys, I'm still here. And we're like, that's great. You said you were going to come translate today. Like, yay, we're glad you're here. We're like, what? He's like, no, I'm still alive. We're like, this was in question? He's like, yeah, I'm part of the drug gang. And after I got saved last night, I went back and I told him, I'm out. I can't deal drugs anymore. Like, I belong to Jesus now. He's like, I was sure they were going to kill me. I thought last night was going to be my last night on earth. He's like, they let me walk away. I think it's because they found out that there is a powerful God who protects his people. So, if you're thinking of getting involved in missions, and you're like, well, what if I get myself in some really dangerous situation, like even just on accident, I walk into it and I'm like, oops, now what? God is trustworthy. I don't know how your story will end in that situation. It could even end with you going to heaven, quick trip to heaven. That's still a good ending, okay? God is still powerful. He will take care of you. All right, so moving on to Asia. I love Southeast Asia, all right? This is one of my favorite places to work. I was working in a country that has a civil war going on. Longest running civil war in the world. They've basically been fighting since the end of World War II. And I used to be able to go in openly. And so I've been going there for several years, taking teams, working with kids. And our host calls me up. Her name's Charity. Well, not her real name. But she calls me and she's like, hey, I have this great idea for what you can do with the team the last week. And now I've learned anytime Charity gets that excited, you should probably run the other way because it's 100% going to be dangerous. I didn't know that then. So I'm like, yeah, great. Like, what's this idea? And she's like, oh, so up in the northern part of the country, there are all these refugee camps because internally displaced people because of the fighting. I was like, okay. And she's like, I was just working in one of the refugee camps. There's like 100 kids sitting around with nothing to do. And she's like, you could take your team there and work with the kids. I already got government permission. I'm like, we need government permission for this? Yeah. She's like, you can't get into these places without having government permission. I'm like, okay, yeah, that sounds cool. How do we get there? And, oh, you can go to the next slide. And she said, well, there's 2 ways to get there. You can take the bus. That takes 48 hours each way. Or you can fly. That takes 4 hours. I'm like, I choose fly. I don't have, we just didn't have the time in the schedule. And also, that sounded like a lot of car sickness. So, okay, what is the cost to get tickets? Well, we are going to need tickets for ourselves, plus our translators, because there wasn't going to be anyone there who could translate. And by the time we figured up all the extra costs, it was going to be an extra $5,000. We were leaving in 2 weeks. Everyone had already done all their fundraising. I couldn't ask everybody like, hey, by the way, all of a sudden we need $5,000 more. So I look at my own bank account, look in the ministry bank account, and I was like, there's not an extra $5,000 anywhere. So I told her, I was like, well, okay, I don't have $5,000. But if God provides $5,000, like, we'll go, because I love this idea. How soon do we need to buy those airplane tickets? And she's like, oh, in about a week. All right, I have never seen $5,000 show up in a week before. And I was like, oh, this sounds impossible. I was like, okay, well, I'll pray about it and see. If God provides $5,000 in a week, we'll go. So I called the rest of the team, told them to pray about it. It was like super cool opportunity, but we don't have the money. 2 days later, someone calls and says, hey, I heard about this thing with the refugee camp. Sounds like a fantastic opportunity. I would like to do a matching funds. Like, I'll do up to half. I'm like, okay, great. Within 5 days, all $5,000 had come in. And literally the only people I told about this were the other team members and asked them to pray. Okay, I had never seen money show up like this before. So I call Charity. I'm like all excited. I'm like, Charity, you won't believe this. We have $5,000. Like, we can buy the tickets. This is great. And she's just like, uh-huh. Like, she wasn't even surprised. Okay, that's the way this woman operates. If God says go, she's like, okay, and figures out the details later because she just assumes that, like, if God said go, he's going to work it out. So we buy the tickets, fly to the country, have a great 3 weeks of ministry. We're getting to the last week, and I'm texting Charity, and I'm like, hey, who's my contact up in the northern part of the country? Silence. And, like, she's in another part of the country herself, so I can't just, like, walk up to her door and be like, hey, I need details. I'm like, how are we working transportation there? Because I've never been to this part of the country. I was like, transportation, housing, food. How do we get to the refugee camp? Like, what's our plan? And finally, she texts me and she's like, well, the government canceled your permission to work in the refugee camp. I was like, oh, no. Like, I thought God had, like, provided for us to go. And I was like, well, is there plan B? Like, is there something else we can do there? Silence. And so we start praying because we're supposed to get on this plane tomorrow. And as a team, we're like, what are we going to do? And we decided that since God had miraculously provided the money for the airline tickets, he wanted us to go there, and we were going to get on the plane with no idea what was going to happen when we got off as far as food, housing, transportation, or ministry plans. So I was about 15 of us. We all get on the plane. We fly up there, and we get off the plane, and it is like a war zone up there, okay? There's these giant signs everywhere that are like, foreigners, don't go to these places. You will be shot. And there's just a list of names. And I'm like, do you have a tourist map to go with that? Like, that, I don't know where those places are. I will try to say, but I don't know where that is. And then we have to go through, like, immigration all over again, but it's the military running it. So each person has to go up to the table, and this military guy who says nothing just takes your passport and then writes down your info. Gives it back. Like, no smile, no friendliness, nothing, no English. And every time someone in my group went up, this old guy, very traditional garb, would lean over and whisper something. Also not in English, so I have no idea what he was saying. But it was just, my team was all mixed in with everybody else, and we weren't the only foreigners, so it wasn't super obvious. Also, I had people from the country who were translators, but somehow every time there was someone in my group who went up, this guy would whisper something, and I'm like, he knows who we are. Like, who is he? Is it secret police? Like, what are we doing? Like, are we all about to get arrested? And finally, we get our whole team through immigration. And this guy comes walking up to me, and I'm like, moment of truth. Now what? Also, I still have no idea what we're doing for food, housing, transportation, or ministry. And I don't know. We could sleep in the airport for a week. He walks up to me, puts out his hand, says, hi, I'm Pastor David. I'm like, you speak English? You are now my new favorite person. He's like, yeah, I heard about what happened with, like, not being able to go to the refugee camp. I'm like, yeah, that was really sad. And he's like, so, I mean, this kids camp idea, it sounds fantastic. I was thinking, would you like to come and do it at our church instead? I was like, yeah, that would be awesome. And he's like, oh, good, because I have vehicles out here for you guys, and you're coming to my house for lunch. We have a hotel for you, and you can eat all week at the church, and we'll just do the kids camp right there at the church. I was like, oh my goodness, food, housing, transportation, ministry plan, all at once. Like, this is great. I was like, that's fantastic. How many kids are we talking? He's like, well, I hope you don't mind. It sounded like such a good idea. It's about 400 kids. I was like, we plan on 100. Okay, and I was like, how are we going to, we're going to run out of craft supplies. We're going to run out of everything. But you know what? I got it taken care of food, housing, transportation, and ministry in the last 3 minutes, so sure, well, no problem. He's like, yeah, I invited like kids from 3 different refugee camps, 4 different churches, 2 orphanages, and I'm like, okay then, great. So we show up, 400 kids, run a whole week-long kids program. And remember, this is our last week in the country. We didn't have extra by the time we got there. Somehow, we never ran out of craft supplies. And the only explanation I have is that God multiplies loaves, fishes, and butterfly crafts. Like, we never ran out of stuff. So that ended up, the next year, we went back there, and that same pastor invited all of the teachers from all of the refugee camps to come and be trained by us how to share the gospel with kids and how to teach kids. So the government thought they could keep the gospel out of one refugee camp, and instead, all the refugee camps in the northern part of the country got to hear the gospel because one team was willing to get on a plane with no plans and no idea what was going on. So remember I said, God's powerful. He can take care of you, whatever situation you get into. Number 2, he knows what he's doing, okay? Ministry missions is very much like plan A is everything goes according to plan. Believe me, if you go on one of the trips we plan, Global Encounters, and probably if you go with your church, there's a plan, all right? You have transportation set up, you have food, you have ministry supplies, you've got maybe a curriculum if you're working with kids. I mean, we literally send suitcases of supplies and everything. But option B, when option A goes wrong, well, there is no option B a lot of times. Option B is God shows up and works a miracle. And honestly, missionaries live in option B a lot. And it's fun. It is amazing. You get to see God work. So just a couple months ago, in November, I was in that same country, except, well, I was in the next door country, and my plan was to sneak over the border, which sounds really sketch and dangerous, except that, like, everybody does it, okay? You just, like, military's not around, okay? And you just take a little boat across the river. And so we've been doing this. We go over there. We work with the kids. We work with the refugee kids that have now crossed over into the safe side of the border, the other country. There's a bunch of schools there. We work with them there, and then we go over into the dangerous side. Well, we show up, we're like all ready for 2 weeks of ministry there on the border, and our host says, hey, the school where you've been working just got bombed. And it wasn't even an airplane bombing where they had warning. It was a drone bombing. And so there's no warning at all. They specifically targeted the school. I do not understand a government that targets their own children and deliberately tries to kill the children in the country. That's why these kids need the gospel. Their chance of living a full life is actually not great. And there are times that we've gotten to work with kids that died before we got back the next year. Like, it is urgent to share the gospel with these kids. Also, they have to live in this situation. I can't end it. I can't end the Civil War. I wish I could. If I could do something that would end the Civil War, I would. But I can't. I can make sure that the kids don't go into it alone. That they know that there is a God who loves them, that they know that Jesus will never leave them. Anyway, the school got bombed, and they had shut down all the schools on the other side of the river because they'd been told that there were more bombings coming. So I was like, okay, well, why don't we just work with another school on the safe side of the river? There's tons of schools. They've all been asking for us to come. You can go to the next slide. And none of the schools were available. Like, one school after another, they're like, oh, sorry, we've got exams that week. We've got one thing after another, except one school. But it was a high school. And my team actually had plenty of 15 and 16-year-olds on it. How would all of you feel about teaching high school for a week? Slightly intimidating? Or are you like, yeah, sign me up. I want to go teach high school. Okay, I got a couple takers. How many of you think that sounds slightly intimidating? That your students will be older than you? Okay? Also, remember, these kids have missed a lot of years of school, so sometimes even though it's like senior in high school, they might be 24. All right? Anybody think that sounds intimidating? Yeah? All right. Well, I kept praying. I was like, God, we need some other option. And he kept being like, nope, this is your option. And finally he was like, would you stop complaining about it? This is my plan. Show up with your team and do the ministry. I was like, okay, guys, God said go. So we're showing up at the high school. We get there. It's 200 Buddhist students. All right? And they are not at all sure that they want a group of Christians there. Like, they were just very standoffish, like the first 2 days. And then the third day, like, they really started warming up to us. The fourth day, one of the girls on the team, Katie, was not feeling good. And she's like, I just don't have the energy to teach. I was like, well, would you like to come along and just pray while everybody else is teaching? And she's like, absolutely, I can do that. So she's sitting in a side room praying, and I'm running around, like, making sure everything's going. Everybody's got all their supplies, whatever. And God was just like, hey, stop and go pray with Katie. I was like, okay. So I, like, go running in. I sit down next to Katie, and we start praying. And God told me, ask me for these kids. I was like, I mean, God, you've been here all week, too. Like, they're not ready, okay? Like, I don't think they're ready for the gospel. Like, we were planning to share the gospel that day, but I was expecting maybe 2 or 3 kids would respond. And God's like, ask me for these kids. Ask me for a miracle. And so I'm like, okay, God, please, open these kids' hearts. Like, may more of them accept the gospel than I could possibly imagine. Like, please blow my mind today. And my timer goes off. I'm like, oh, I got to go, like, tell people to rotate to the next activity. So I go running down the hallway, and I poke my head in the door, and 3 kids are on their knees praying with their teacher. And I went running back, and I'm like, Katie, you won't believe it, but 3 kids are praying with Lauren next door. And she's like, I just started praying for Lauren. I'm like, well, keep it up. And I go running back down the hallway, and I poke my head in the next classroom to be like, hey, guys, I'm going to wrap it up and rotate. And, like, half the class is on their knees praying. And so I go running back, and I'm like, Katie, you won't believe it. Half of Isaac's class is praying. And she's like, I just started praying for Isaac. I'm like, keep praying. The rest of the day went like that. By the end of the day, half of those kids there, 100 of the kids, had prayed and asked Jesus to save them. These were Buddhist kids who were, at the beginning of the week, completely closed to the gospel. Now, remember I said, first thing is, God's powerful. Second, he knows what he's doing. Third, he loves you. But I don't just mean, like, generically, he loves all of us. I mean, he knows your name. He knows what your hopes and your dreams are. He knows what's going on in your heart. Not just for you, but for everyone that's potentially on your mission team, for all the kids that you're working with. My heart was not there, but God knew where there were 100 kids that were ready to respond to the gospel. So, if you're thinking about getting involved in ministry, and you're like, what if I get myself into a situation I don't know what to do with? You will. Like 100%, whether it's ministry here or ministry out of the country. It will happen. But you serve a trustworthy God, a powerful God, who will work in those times when you have totally stepped out on a limb and you don't know what to do. So I hope that you guys take that step. Like, if you're standing on the edge and God's asking you to commit and go do some ministry, please do it. Like, jump in and do it. If you're at all interested in what I do with Global Encounters and the children's ministry, there's a table back there. My friend Haley is behind the table. We've got info about all of our different trips. We've also got, like, a bunch of coins from around the world, and if you can figure out close to which country it's from, we'll go for close. You can have it. You can take it home. Please, take some coins home because they make my suitcase really heavy. So help yourself. There's photo books of what we do. Do we have time for discussion groups? All right. I have some discussion questions for your group leaders, and I will turn it back over.